One of the other examples I looked at was refraction. How do we get this sweet, gorgeous looking, crystalline-like look? Zoe loves this. Who doesn't love some sweet, sweet, gorgeous refraction? So how do we get started with this particular approach? Well, there's some research materials we can use also, right? So in addition to the shading cookbook, which has some great examples, there's also a couple lovely references on the forum. One of them, LO5 Carlos, thank you very much. This is a really rad look at how to do faux refraction. And some of the same technique actually comes from looking at both what Carlos did and then also looking at this rad article on Medium, similarly sourced from another post on the forum, about how we can think about simulating refraction. And one of the interesting pieces here is what they point out is we can think about refraction in some ways by calculating a normal map, right? We can do some pre-calculated refraction. In their case, they're baking out a set of UVs on a particular object and then using that as a distortion map for a texture. And we can actually do a very similar kind of approach right here in TouchDesigner, and we can do it on the fly. So what does that look like? How do we get here? Well, this technique will work both with the same approach that we used previously, where we had a whole world that we're dealing with, that we're starting from, or we could use this in a more kind of traditional kind of 2D approach. Now, one of the interesting pieces about Carlos's example, and I think I might actually have it here. Is it in my downloads? Yeah, there you are. Okay, so in this faux refraction example, right, if we take a look at what Carlos is up to here, which is very tricksy, is that we're doing two different renders. We've got a piece of geometry that represents our mask for our object, so how we're masking it, and then also how we're going to do some of the distortion on it. So we can see here our displace top actually is doing the distortion, then we're masking out all of the junky background that we don't want, and then we're comping that on top, right, run over our original base plate. We're going to use a similar kind of technique. We're going to do just something slightly different over here to kind of save ourselves a little bit of this wobbly wobble, because some of that's a little bit fussy, IMO. So let's start in a largely similar way, right? Let's go ahead, and this time around what we can do is let's make sure that we similarly have a camera, we've got a light, we've got a geometry. Great, we have all the ingredients for our scene. I'm going to go ahead and make a base and do all this in another base. I'm going to cut, and let's jump inside. Boom, paste. All right, so we've got our good old scene set up here. We're going to add a render top so we can actually render our scene, see what we're up to. I'm going to leave this as a torus for now, but I'm going to go ahead and rotate this just a little bit so it's just slightly easier to see what mischief we're up to. And I am going to just scale that down a smidge bit, technical term, so it fits in my camera view. Okay, so now what? I'm also going to take the approach, right? I'm going to use the same idea that we had before. I'm going to start with another geometry, and I'm going to treat this as my sky. Dive inside, delete my torus, add a sphere. I'm going to turn up the detail of this slightly. Let's do like maybe like 4080. We'll just double the quality of that. Let's Alt-N, add a null. Make sure it's displayed and rendered. Okay, great. We're going to crank that up similarly to 10. We can see here that it now encompasses everything. We need to also texture this, so I got a movie file in, Alt N, add a null. Let's pick a lovely little, where is our Palace of Fine Arts? Let's add a constant material, right? Our null. This is our world. We put it on here. That's our material. Okay, grad. Shoo! So far, we're seeing a lot of the same idea. Okay, well, how does this get different? Because it doesn't seem different yet. Well, first, let's make sure that we render one of these without our object in it. So, or without our world, without our object in it first. So in this case, I'm only going to worry about Geo2. But let's do ourselves a favor. Let's call that Geo Sky. So we made sure that it's the sky. We know it's the sky. This time I'm going to use a render pass. Render pass isn't quite as necessary on modern GPUs, but on older GPUs, this is a kind of tricksy way to do multiple pass rendering and preserve some of your GPU memory. I'm going to drag the render pass, or render top, onto the render pass. We can see it's going to add everything under the sun in here. In my case, I really only want this to render Geo1. And I want to make sure that I clear my camera color and clear my depth buffer. So now I have just this object. So far, so good. This is pretty rad. What I want though, and what I need is ultimately, well, let's, before we get there, let's hang on to this idea, because we're going to add a displace top. And this is going to be totally wrong to get started, and that's okay. We're just going to roll with it. Whoa, look at all that just garbage. Let's go ahead and let's turn our displace weights down to 0 and 0. Ha, rad. And I'm just going to turn this up just, not even 0.01. And I think maybe 0.1 here, right? Oh, even less than that. We don't want too refractory a material just yet. Okay, so we can start to see how some of that is bending, but it's not the right way. It's really, there are a lot of things wrong with that, boy golly. It's, almost the right idea, but we're really just like all over the map. Well, what can we do? If we go back here and we think about this UV map, right? If we want to use the same UV map idea, we could think about how do we render, or how do we texture this object, right? How do we texture our material, or how do we texture our geometry as if, right? As if it were just its UVs. And in fact, we've got some really great ways to do that.